So let's talk a little bit about programming drums. To start, I'm going to use a new song from template. And I'm going to choose the empty project. This time I'm going to use Ultrabeat. So I'm going to use software instrument, hit create. And I'm going to pop Ultrabeat into the instrument here. Now, what is Ultrabeat? Well, basically it's a pattern-based sequencing program used just for drums. So on the left-hand side, we have our key bed, and then we have our voices. These are the individual voices of the instrument: mute, solo, panning, and output. To the right of that, we have the synthesizer. So for every voice, we get a completely new set of settings for the synthesizer on the right. The synthesizer consists of two oscillators. These are two tone generators. And then we have a noise generator. We have a filter section that gets fed by the volume settings and such from here. Then we have an EQ and our output for each individual voice. So if I go to the kick, you see that this kick is actually made up of just oscillator 1 going into the filter. Or actually, it's not going into the filter because this little thing isn't selected. So we're literally just getting this wave coming to the output with a little bit of EQ. Ultrabeat is really, really complicated. So what I'm going to do first is come down here where it says pattern and choose a pattern that's not being used. I know patterns are being used when it says SQ next to them. So I'll choose 10. Now down below, we have our sequencer. So if I turn the power on the sequencer, essentially it's ready to go. So I hit play, and then I select this area to play a note. Now I can go to another voice, and it gets a whole different sequencer. Okay, I'm just hitting stop on the sequencer here every time it stops. Now, Ultrabeat's pretty amazing. It's pretty cool to have our sequencer going on at the bottom of the screen for each individual voice. But if I want to kind of see them all in context, I click full view on the lower right-hand side. Now, if I go to the close hi-hats, I can either type them in here just by clicking, or if I right-click, it gives me some cool tools like add every downbeat. Let's see what that sounds like. Hit play on the sequencer. So now we have a pattern. If I go down here, I can see A-1. What does A-1 mean? Well, essentially, I can trigger this pattern from a keyboard now, if I want to. Okay, so I'll turn off full view. And how would I get this pattern into my arrange window if I want to do some additional editing in Logic? Well, this little tiny area right here, you can pull that into the arrange window, and it gives you a region. So that's pretty cool. Now there are two different modes to Ultrabeat. Basically, on the left-hand side here, we have voice and we have step. Now when you have voice selected, it's just playing back what you have. You can set your synthesizer for every voice. Each voice has its own sequencer at the bottom, and you just kind of sequence everything. But when you're in step mode, this gives you the ability to actually change parameters on the fly. It's sort of like step-based automation. So if I go to this snare and choose step, I could actually choose something about that snare to adjust. So I'm going to go to 5 here, and I'll choose maybe something simple like I'll choose pitch. So let's see, this snare apparently doesn't have a lot going on. I'll select this parameter. I'm going to hit play just to make sure that parameter plays. Yeah, okay, it's playing. Cool. So basically all of these yellow parameters you can control by using step mode. And if you drag that region up into the tracks area, it will still control those parameters because those are all assigned to controller values, like we saw in section 3. So there's my controller values. If I click here, I can go to each controller that I messed with. Hitting this means that you go to the next controller that has been used. And I can just mess with it right there. Like maybe I don't want these nodes. It's nice and clean now. Now when I hit play, it was actually playing both this sequencer and logic. So I want to make sure to turn the sequencer off when I'm done working in Ultrabeat. Settings were really high on that, but especially after I tweaked it. So there you go, that's Ultrabeat. It's a step-based drum program. Now what can also be kind of cool is I'm going to delete all these notes. So I can delete all the notes by selecting all and hitting backspace. But if I want to delete all the controller information, remember I can go to the event list, filter out notes, simply select all, and delete. Cool. So now I'm starting from scratch. Check out this editor, the step editor. The step editor basically creates MIDI control data in a linear fashion according to a grid. So on the left-hand side where it says lane set, these are all lanes. And your inspector is changing dynamically to show the step editor parameters. So lane set is set to MIDI controls. If I go to General MIDI Drum Kit, look, I get all of my individual drums. And I can use my pencil tool, which is right now set to command click, to draw in whatever I want. Cool, so that was the kick pattern. Now I can make a snare. Now I'm going to drag across and just write in my notes for my hi-hat. Oop, that was the snare. Now you also get a tool in here. You get the line tool. It allows you to draw these cool little lines and lines of the controller data to it. So that's the step editor in a nutshell. Now I'm using note values that are assigned to a General MIDI drum kit, which is pretty standard. The individual grids are set in the lane information up here in the upper left-hand side. So right now it says the 16th note, but if I went to the open hi-hat and said, I want to do that by 8th notes, you can see that the grid is actually changed. So that's the step editor. Step editors are a really cool way that you can enter note information, or if you wanted to, I could go to a different lane set, which is basically just the same view, or it's the same region and all the same stuff in the region, but I have this cool kind of control over volume, pan, modulation, pitch bend, and channel pressure. These are all the velocities for all the notes. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, you can actually automate anything in the step editor, and it behaves like a sequencer that you have on board a drum machine or similar. Okay, so that's Ultrabeat. Now we should talk a little bit about Drummer and Drum Kit Designer.